I think because originally the truth is that the Constitution does come from the Iroquois Confederacy. It does come, and the U.S. Congress acknowledged that not long ago, that it does indeed influenced by and you find out Franklin and Jefferson did go and spend at least 30 years before and learned the Mohawk jargon, the Mohegan jargon, all the Iroquois jargon of trade, and learned and sat with their councils and studied and like, wow, these people had equality, men and women. And they said, how couldn't, and at that time there were a few million. It wasn't just 100,000 or so. There were millions of Native people across this land that lived the same way, the same principles. So it was not just the Iroquois, but the Constitution was in this part in Philadelphia in the Northeast. So, so that's where they talk about. In fact, Jake Swamp and Tom Porter, who are traditional chiefs this day of the Iroquois Confederacy, have those stories that are not written into history books. They may be referenced, but when the Iroquois chiefs were asked to come to the Freedom Hall, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, they were put upstairs. And whenever the Continental Congress had deliberations, they would go upstairs and ask the Native people, what did you do when you got to this part? And the thing that we don't hear is that these chiefs were locked into the upstairs. They were only brought food and questions. And we don't hear the other part of, you know, how the founding fathers actually excluded the Native people. Well, that's a mindset, because this country needed an enemy. And the women and children, well, they were property of the rich white males, and they couldn't vote. And the black man was property also, so they couldn't vote. Women belonged, poor white people belonged as serfs or serfdom in that thinking of it, and they were property. They couldn't vote. They didn't have power. But then you had millions upon millions of Native people. Let's not let them vote. Let's not let them vote, because that means there's going to be power here. So from that time, we were mentioned as far as being governed by commerce, and that the United States did have say in what they traded with other countries and whatnot. And that's in the Constitution. And with the Indian tribes, right. Yeah. And so they mentioned Indian nations within, and that was about it. And today that's still true, but as far as giving us freedom of religion, communal property, which we were used to sharing, that did not fit privatization and ownership, and monarchy especially, because as you see, this country still adores the King and Queen of England, yet it's a country that's not supposed to be upon those principles where everybody is inalienable and is treated equally. Well, it's not true with Native peoples even today. When you are an evidence, living evidence of that Constitution and the crimes committed against Native people such as myself, and knowing that, and being able to understand the inequalities, well, that's not going to be listened to, because that's the enemy talking to them. So for your 12-year-old, I say, you know, look at what you're reaping as an American. And you really think in as ownership terms, you think about all Americans, any American, foreigners who come here want a piece of the American pie. Metaphorically, I say, if you want a piece of the American pie, just don't forget who owns the bakery.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.